going on, guys? And welcome to the first episode of the Women series, where I will be tackling nutrition and training topics specifically for women. The first episode couldn't be more womanly because today we are talking about the menstrual cycle, specifically dieting and training in alignment with your menstrual cycle. So the research on this is surprisingly unanimous, so I'm really excited to go over it with you. And in addition to my ladies, men, if you are a coach to female clients, I also think you will find value in this video. But first, if we are going to be covering diet and training in accordance with your menstrual cycle, let's begin with briefly going over a normal menstrual cycle. Menstrual, derived from the Latin word for month, is the 28-day cycle that a woman will go through from puberty until menopause. This cycle is essential for potential pregnancy, and it's where the woman's body will undergo hormonal changes aimed for the success of maturing, fertilizing, and then implanting an egg into the uterine wall. The uterine wall has thickened in preparation for supplying nutrients for this fertilized egg, and if you don't get pregnant, then the thickened wall is then expelled, which is when you bleed or menstruate. So day 1 of the cycle begins at the onset of bleeding, and this will last about 3 to 5 days, and the remainder of the 28 days are split up into 2 distinct phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. Now, as you can see, the follicular phase is typically the first half of the cycle, and the luteal phase is the second half of the cycle. The luteal phase officially begins when you ovulate, or when an egg is released from the ovaries. Now, we can get into a lot of detail on all the hormones involved in the menstrual cycle, but for the scope of this video, we will just be touching on the 2 big players, estrogen and progesterone. In the early follicular phase, estrogen and progesterone are both quite low. As you get into the late follicular phase, estrogen will rapidly climb and reach its peak right before ovulation. After that, it will decline, rise again mid-luteal phase, and then dramatically drop in the late luteal phase, which is the week right before you get your period. In contrast, progesterone will remain low throughout the entire follicular phase, and then it'll start to drastically increase after ovulation. And this happens in the early luteal phase, where it will reach peak levels and then drop late luteal phase in sync with estrogen. So they both decline until the cycle restarts again. So what does this mean in terms if you are dieting? So as you probably already know, your hormones play a big role in not only appetite, but also food cravings. And it could be a whole video on hormones other than estrogen and progesterone, like cortisol and leptin and ghrelin, but we're gonna save that for another video. And with that in mind, I'd like to offer a few recommendations just based off of what the literature has to say if you're planning to start a diet. A study in 1983 by Plinner and colleagues, measuring caloric intake and food preference of 41 females throughout their cycle, showed that women eat significantly more calories in the luteal phase of their cycle than in the follicular phase. Another study in 1995 by Barr et al., measuring caloric intake of 42 women, reported the same findings, that women just tend to eat a lot more in the luteal phase, which is the second half of the 28-day cycle. Simply put, right after ovulation, which is the 2 weeks leading up to your period. Which in my personal experience makes a lot of sense. I think I do tend to get a lot more cravings and probably eat more leading up to my cycle, which is believed to be due to a drop of estrogen, which may facilitate an effect on dopaminergic neurotransmission and serotonin synthesis. This is thought to lead to sugar cravings. So how can you utilize this information in a practical sense? So with the summertime upon us, many of us are seeking to shed a few pounds. So a way you can approach this is to just set yourself up with a good start. Since it seems that hunger and cravings are highest in the luteal phase of your cycle, I'd recommend starting your diet in the follicular phase. The start of the follicular phase is when you start your period. So you can consider starting your diet when your appetite isn't quite as high. However, cravings and appetite are highly variable, so this may not be the best time for you, but in my personal experience, the week of my period, I feel a bit bloated and have cramps, so I'm not really as super hungry. However, the week leading up to my period, I am pretty ravenous, so I'm pretty hungry, and this is usually a sign that I am about to get my period. So structuring your diet this way may also help you get through that initial hump of starting a diet. So when hunger does go up a bit in like the 3rd week of your diet, you have already seen progress, you've already got your diet going, and this may entice you to keep the ball rolling. Another application for this information is when to implement a diet break, which is generally when you are in the midst of your diet and you want to bring your calories or macros back up to maintenance levels. So since hunger is highest in the late luteal phase, or the week right before your period, it would probably be a good time to have that diet break if you are in need of implementing one. Next up is training and how to train in line with your cycle. So I actually found this really interesting, that there are actual differences women experience in strength and muscle gains depending on the phase of the cycle. And this is actually pretty drastic. Research shows that you're actually stronger in the follicular phase of the cycle and can actually optimize muscle gains in this phase. Simply speaking, the week of your period and the week after it are actually the most optimal time in your cycle for you to implement the heaviest strength-focused training. Studies show that women are commonly kind of tired and lethargic in the late luteal phase, which is the 2 weeks leading up to your period. A 2016 study by Friesen et al. Had women split up into 2 groups, where one group was prioritizing training legs in different weeks of their cycle, showed that the group that did most of their training volume in the follicular phase of their cycle gained the most lean body mass, even though they all did the same total amount of volume. Even more impressive was a study in 2014 by Sung et al. Had women unilaterally train their legs with a leg press and a single leg bodyweight squat over the course of 3 menstrual cycles, so 3 months. They had one leg do 8 workouts in the follicular phase and only 2 in the luteal phase, and the other leg do only 2 workouts in the follicular phase and 8 workouts in the luteal phase. As expected, legs that did the most volume in the follicular phase gained more strength measured by maximum isometric force and an increase in muscle cross-sectional area than that in the luteal phase, even though total volume was matched. So with this information, I think you could set up a pretty solid training routine that caters to your strengths and weaknesses, especially if you are one of my ladies that is dramatically affected by their cycle. I personally know a few women that get severe premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD, that can really affect their training that week. So instead of trying to fight it, why not work with it? Practical application of this information tells us that the follicular phase is when women are strongest and can tolerate the most volume and likely to make the most gains. For example, the week of your period, or week 1, you should do your heavy strength-focused workouts, maybe heavy sets in the 6 to 8 rep range. And week 2 could be where you do a lot of volume. A little bit lower weight than the first week, still challenging, maybe in the RPE 9 range, but more sets in the 10 to 12 rep range. And week 3 could be a week you're trying to match the previous week and even attempt to make some progression. But in week 4, when you are your weakest, you could drop back the weight and total volume. Another thing you could do would be to opt to run a full deload that week, where you cut back the weight about 50%, or do pumper style training with resistance bands and body weight, something that you feel would get you ready for the next week of heavy lifting.